I may, I'd like to now switch to a short panel discussion because we've got a number of Albert's senior officers here today with him. Two Alberts left is Moses Wakesa. Moses holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Mechanical Engineering and MSc degrees in Applied Mechanics from Jomo Kenyatta University, previously lectured in the Mechanical Engineering Department at JKUAT. He's also qualified with a postgraduate certificate in Project Planning, Appraisal and Financing from the University of Bradford. Done project work for 15 years, spanning wide economic sectors in Europe, the Asia Pacific and Africa. Registered project manager, responsible for leading planning, development, implementation and execution of the major capital projects through capital planning, public-private partnerships, project execution and driving new business, and very kindly answered my question about the power outage yesterday, and he gave me the best answer I've heard so far from anyone and the most accurate, and I'm sure he'll share that with us in a minute. Two Moseses left is Mary Malu. Mary is the corporate finance manager at KenGen. Her main responsibilities: sourcing for funding to finance the capital expenditure Albert was speaking about for the company's generation projects, cash flow forecasting, maintaining relationships with banks and financiers, negotiating power purchase agreements, currency risk management through currency hedging. Last year, 16 profits warnings at the stock exchange. Every single one of them talked about FX. Investing surplus funds in various currencies, project accounting, managing loan disbursements from and loan repayments to financiers, taxation, tax planning, and in charge of operational cost efficiencies. I did not get Simon's resume, but I've known Simon a long time. I remember we were down in Naivasha for the, at the time of President Kibaki, when he was, I don't know which old carrier it was, but I think it was 2011 when we were down there. Simon is the Regulatory and Corporate Affairs Director at KenGen, amongst many other accomplishments. And also, are you not also leading the effort with community engagement as well? And that's a big, obviously a big area that you've got to manage. I know the big multilateral lenders are always very keen to tick that box, and Simon is managing that. So why don't you tell everybody what's going on with the power sector, please? So, because that was a huge debate yesterday. I saw social media going crazy, and I think people would like to know what's happening.
Let me start by disclaiming what Sachu said earlier. Yes, we had a problem, and I'll come to that. But just to give you an overview, we are currently in a very aggressive power expansion strategy as KenGen, and largely driving the government agenda, which you know has been the 5,000 plus megawatts. Now, out of that allocation, KenGen was designated to generate or bring onto the grid just about 840 megawatts. And in the period that has just passed, you're looking at about 35 months, we've been able to put or bring onto the grid just over 360 megawatts, giving us an estimated percentage of 46%. And as the MD was talking to you, all these projects are green projects. We had a small additional unit at Kindaruma, 24 megawatts. The balance of that then is 20 megawatts on Gong Hills. For those of you who have a good view and you live in high apartments, you may have noticed that there are more windmills coming up on Gong Hills. But the bulk of that then is dominantly in Olkaria. Now within Olkaria, we continue to carry out drilling activities in a reservoir that has been found to be very, very productive and stable. Back then, about 34 years when we did Olkaria 1, that plant is still generating. But subsequently, we then accelerated our efforts And we are currently sitting on projects within geothermal that will bring on board another 370 megawatts in the immediate future. Okay? Now, alongside that, our sister companies, KETRACO and Kenya Power, who then are in charge of transmission and distribution, continue also to invest aggressively in infrastructure for evacuation. KETRACO, for example, as you may be aware, has been carrying out multiple projects across the country in upgrading our old infrastructure, high voltage evacuation lines. Olkaria, where predominantly you'll find today we have more than 500 megawatts coming from KenGen and a private company, IPP that generates there called OMAT, has the hub of most of that power if you then move away from the hydros. Now, the lines that we continue to use to dispatch power from that generation point to the load centers, the biggest load center, of course, is Nairobi, and we are then trying to connect the next big load center, which is Mombasa. Those lines are old, and as the MD was talking about the years around which he was born, when the Owen Falls line was done, that line terminates in a substation called Juja. So that substation is around the age of my boss. And for some reason, the revitalization of that substation, it reminds me that the substation is not as good as him. So the modernization of that substation is ongoing and has not been completed. Now think about most of the power coming in, terminating at that point, and therefore there are safety equipment that from time to time experience challenges. One of those challenges was experienced yesterday. So yes, to concur what you were saying, we have sufficient power in the grid. Now, KETRACO, on the other hand, is also doing lines that will bring in or create a ring alternative circuit that then brings most of that power with a higher voltage capability into Nairobi. We've experienced challenges, and Simon here will be talking about some of those challenges, that we are evacuating power through the substation of Suswa, Isinya, Nairobi. And that general area is community land, pastoralists that traverse major areas, and land ownership is still in community hands. The same challenges you may be seeing with our large infrastructure projects, the standard gauge railway, our road infrastructure, around acquisition of way leaves and land. For those of you who drive in this direction, Langata Road to Karen, you know that around Galeria we faced the challenge and that road has not been finished. Now, it's not any different that our power evacuation program has dragged on behind schedule. And for that matter, we are still evacuating most of that power that I've talked about coming in through the old lines. And that, to some extent, is forcing us to then evacuate lesser and lesser power. But on the overall, I think as far as generation is concerned, we are on course. We are supporting a major government agenda. The question that I would like to preempt at this point is, as MD mentioned, with a capacity, installed capacity of 1,611, national now at 2,200, our peak demand still sits at 1,500. You will see that recently, as the President was commissioning some street lighting projects in Mombasa, the availability of that power in the grid is making us more proactive in reaching more Kenyans with power. But not only that, we are also saying that when investors come in today, we are not promising them that when you come and set up, we will give you power. We are showing them that the power is available. I think I'll stop at that point.
If I can now turn to Mary. Mary, why don't you talk to us a little bit about the corporate finance component? You know, I was half joking, but I was being very serious when I was saying every time I sit next to Albert, the EIB wants to give him $140 million, or the South Koreans, or the French agency over there. To give us a little bit of a feel of what's going on, and why you're able to sort of suck in such strong partners who are prepared to offer you such strong and big tickets.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I would attribute our ability to attract strong partners first of all, the track record of KenGen. Yeah, KenGen has proven itself as a company that can deliver projects. One of the things that financiers and partners look for is kind of certainty that when they advance some loans, those loans are going to be drawn down, they're going to be put to the use that was purposed, and the borrower will be able to deliver and be able to generate cash flows from that project and subsequently be able to service the loans. That is one of the things that we are very proud about as KenGen. In fact, I would say confidently that we are not short of supply of, like, particularly debt equity. We have a lot of people interested in our projects. And it's just because of that mere fact that we can deliver on our projects, and we do it efficiently, so that compared to other implementers, then we come out strong, and this is quite an attraction. And when it comes to debt service, we do not have issues with debt service. We are parastatal, and I can confirm that when we get reports like from National Treasury on how other parastatals have performed in terms of debt servicing, you find others are lagging behind. In fact, we look at some letters and we wonder, do we respond to this letter or not? Because it's not, we just want to report, we are tempted to report and say not applicable, but of course we cannot say not applicable. We'll just put a statement to say KenGen is up to date, because we see schedules there saying, please tell us which loans you are lagging behind on, put a schedule, reasons why, and when you expect to catch up. So we find like such is not applicable, and that's when we realize, oh, we are doing okay. So that gives our partners and financiers a confidence that when they deal with KenGen, then those projects are going to be delivered and the debts will be serviced. Locally, you know, we had the infrastructure bond, which was very successful. And those who are investors in that bond know that after every 6 months, a check comes your way servicing that bond. And I think that is one of our strong points as KenGen. Thank you.
Can you inform us? I mean, you know, we always see there's a lot of noise around local communities, managing those relationships. I think at one point, you know, down in Naivasha, there was a lot of debate around the local community there. Can you just give us a bit of a flavor of how you manage that, and what is the secret to sort of balancing the community interests with the interest to develop the country, and what has been your biggest challenge there, would you say?
Thank you, Ori. A question that shouldn't possibly go to an engineer, but I get to do this. Let me first step back and just say that this is one of the challenges that Kenya is facing, not just KenGen. Yeah, we've seen our sister companies, Ketraco, are able to finish transmission lines between Isinya and Mombasa. We currently are having a few issues in getting the way leaves for the line that will come down from Turkana. So this is something that Kenya as a country is grappling with. The National Land Commission is getting involved. We're involving the cabinet secretaries now. It's a discussion that's way up there. Why is that so? The reason is, in 2010, we got a new constitution. And in that constitution, communities benefiting from infrastructure projects and natural resources is now embedded in the constitution. And the NGO world has done a very good job informing the public what their rights are. And because of that, everybody wants to see that if a transmission line comes through your land, that you've got the benefits that the Constitution sort of guarantees you. And that's where the challenge begins. So we've got a legal problem in that we do not have a law that then defines how that's done, okay? And at the community level is a little more serious than it is at the county level, because the county governments as well do have some kind of a stake in getting that benefit. So it's something that's transitional, but at the same time, it's something that needs to be looked at that higher level. Now, what do we do in Olkaria? For example, in Olkaria, where Ari is saying we had some noise, Mic is going on. We actually had both, not just a community issue, but we also had an issue of land ownership. The land on which we built recently Olkaria 4 is land that was owned by a private landowner. But then the communities living there was quarters. But because they had stayed there for more than 12 years, the law then requires that there would be some kind of a resettlement because they had some kind of a right to the land. And that's where we began talking to the communities. And so we resettled all the community people that were affected by that project, 1,181 families. We've spent 1.5 billion Kenya shillings in that resettlement. We built each family a 2-bedroom house. We bought them 1,700 acres of land. Why do we do that? We do that because we not only want social license, we want them to become partners. We want them to join the KenGen growth story, and we want them to have a story to tell their children. We are working with them now. We built a school for them and a very good health center. We're working with them now to sponsor 4 children every year to secondary school. And our vision is that we'll have 40 graduates out of this community within the next 10 years. All right? And it's because if we do not, I keep saying, you never see a road going to nowhere. There's got to be a reason why you do infrastructure projects. And when you've done them, they've got to have a return that not only impacts the nation at large, but also impacts the local people. And that's why we said that we've got a responsibility. And we like to think of ourselves as a very socially responsible corporate citizen. We've got a responsibility to build our people and make sure that we give them that competitive edge that comes out of resources that are found where they live so that they can go to the next level. And that is what we're doing with our community. So after we started talking to the community, all the politics dropped off, and we were able to go ahead with the project. The project wasn't ever stopped because the community was up in arms. As Albert said, we have stakeholder coordination committees for every project, and we work with them, meeting once or twice a month to ensure that all issues that they may be facing are being addressed. And we do that not only in Olkaria. We've got a stakeholder coordination committee in the Eastern Hydros, in the western side of Kenya. We had one that faced some challenges in Takwel, and that's being brought back. And the purpose of this is to ensure that the communities are partners in us in development and operation of our assets. And that then secures the people we supply the electricity to. You've never heard that a power station was shut down because we had a community problem. Because if that happens then at that level, it doesn't matter how good the transmission lines are, it doesn't matter how good a job KPOC does, you will not have the power. So it's our primary responsibility as a generation utility to ensure that the entire sector has got a good tempo in relating well with the communities. And that's now going to the level of the counties. And that is why you will find we have a stand in every county business expo. Why? Because we want to work well with the counties. We want to explore the opportunities that we have to develop what would be future consumers for our product in those counties. We support the investment that the Nakuru County is looking at of building an industrial park. That will be customers for our products. We support the new investments that are being looked at in the Meru County. We support the connection of Lamu and as well the business park, the industrial park, the special economic zone that's coming up in that area. And that is why we get to be there every single time. And so if you have something interesting, just call us.
On social media, which is asking Albert, what are your thoughts on the share price? I mean, you've outlined an extraordinary performance with those results. You know, I was sort of looking at the valuation. It's a PE of 1. What do you think, Albert, about that? And
okay, what do I think about the share price of KenGen?
yes,
I think the share price of KenGen is greatly undervalued, and because if you look at what one would say the fundamentals of what a company is doing, its results, its business, it just doesn't make sense for the KenGen share to be somewhere where I had yesterday at a level of about 5.5 Kenya shillings. You can look at the profits that we've made. You can look at the cash that we hold even at the end of the year. You can look at the growth that we're projecting to have. And well, I can't put a figure really because probably that's not right. But even considering the general trade of shares at the Nairobi Securities Exchange, I would still think that the price where our share is not the correct price. But I think we have many people here who are probably experts in that field than I am. I don't know what their view is, but that's my view.
Yeah, in 2013 it was trading at around 17 shillings. But when the story of doing a rights issue came up at the AGM, it started going down to 14. And in the last AGM, when you spoke about doing a huge rights issue, it's when it dipped from around 9 shillings to around 5 shillings now. Do you think that this anxiety about the rights issue is what is driving the KenGen price down?
Thank you. George Mungao Konji from Osafric Energy Conservation. Now, I walked in late. I don't know whether you had alluded on the solar energy. Now, what is your take on a study on solar energy as an alternative source of energy in Kenya? Thank you.
My name is Okwaro. My question is, you have presented a very promising picture about our generation of energy into the future. I am just asking, at what point can Kenyans begin to see a reduction in the cost of energy? Of course, I understand that you're only involved in the part of production, but what is your take on the point at which Kenyans will see a reduction in the cost of energy? Because we see sometimes, for example, in petroleum, the prices go down in the international markets, but our country, we don't see a difference. So from your view, at what point will Kenyans begin to see this?
Albert, can I quickly answer that oil question because it keeps coming up about the petrol? I'll just quickly tell you something. What's happened on fuel at the pump is the benefit has accrued to the government. The government has raised taxes so that they've improve their fiscal position. The value of that is pretty enormous right now. I calculated it's between $100 and $150 million a month that Henry is picking up there. So there is a huge benefit that the government has taken. And the fiscal position that people are talking about is actually looking more and more robust, if I might just add that. Henry,
Okay. Yes. Let me add something to the question that Ali has just answered about when are we likely to see the reduction. Let me start by saying that June last year, the fuel cost charge in the electricity bill stood at over 7 shillings. I believe it went to a high of 7 shillings and 51 cents per kilowatt hour. So we put in the first geothermal plant in June, 70 megawatts. We added another 70 megawatts of geothermal in September, and the third one in August, and the final one in December. I think those figures are actually of 2014, not 2015. Yeah, we were adding that plant, in 2014. Yeah, 2014, that's when June, the fuel cost was at 7.51. And as we added the geothermal, that fuel cost charge started coming down, and to a level where we were as low as 3 shillings and 50 cents. And of course, currently, because of the good hydros, we've come down to 2 shillings and 30 something cents. And part of that is because the fuel costs have come down at the international market. But the bigger part of it is the fact that we were utilizing the new geothermal that came in. And just for your information, if you pick the annual report of the Kenya Power and Lighting Company and look at 2013, there is what the customers of electricity, the consumers of electricity paid as fuel charge, and it stood at about 44 billion Kenya shillings in that year. Because of the geothermal that came in, last year, if you pick the annual accounts, that amount has actually come down by more than 50%. What am I saying? I'm saying you've actually already experienced the benefit of the new power plants that are cheaper that have come in. It's just that by the time then you get to the limit and there's no other new plant coming, you are right there and you may not expect any additional costs coming in unless they come from another source, such as now the reduction to 230 because of the increased rain. I hope I've answered that. And if you look at the slides where I showed you how the generation mix is, we have reduced the thermal substantially so that it's now less than 10%. If we could reduce that slightly more, and that will happen perhaps when we complete a line from Nairobi to Mombasa so that we can send some power down there, we could see thermal then reducing to about 8 to 7%. There will be then some small decrease in the usage of thermal, and that can also drive the cost of the fuel cost charge slightly down. Okay. Then the other question was about solar. What do you see for solar as an alternative source? Solar has got a bright future here in Kenya. Currently, it's not there at all. At least you don't have any solar connected to the grid. Why? Because everybody sitting here today, if this was a Kenya Power Forum, you'll be asking, we want the cost of electricity to come down. In fact, the manufacturers keep saying we want somewhere between 5 to 7 US cents per kilowatt hour. Solar currently has been given a cost of about 12 US cents per kilowatt hour. So if you put in solar at the present cost, then it means that if the buyer is buying at 12 US cents per kilowatt hour, they put the transmission and distribution cost plus the overhead, that will cost probably to the tune of about 16 or 17 US cents per kilowatt hour. And clearly, that is not really good even for the economy. However, around the world, the technology for solar is maturing, and we are seeing the prices for solar coming down. I'm told, for example, in South Africa, you are able to get prices of between 8 to 10 US cents per kilowatt hour. And as those prices come down, I believe that solar then will start to be developed here in a big way. And I have no doubt that probably in about 5 to 10 years, we will be seeing, if we show the generation mix, solar will be taking a big percentage. On the question about the rights issue and our share coming down, I would like to get some help from from somebody who may be a little more authoritative than myself.
I was going to reach out to Bob Karina. Bob, and ask you for your valued opinion as to what do you think is going on the share price, and you know, because I think probably, Albert, you have the most shareholders besides Safaricom, I would have thought, individually. So would you care to opine and give us your wise wisdom? What do you think, and what would be your solution to what seems to be a dislocation?
Thank you, Albert and Kan. Yes, it's a difficult situation, but the price of KenGen is actually affected by the bearish mood in the market. It's not that the share or the company has any problem. It's only that when share prices actually going down, they pull down even the strong companies. So it's, I would say, now that you continue giving positive information about the company, it's only in a matter of time, the share price will hold, and then as we get the next results, it will reverse. But the main thing is, we as advisors, we keep telling people, don't just buy because of what you see in the market, understand the fundamentals of the company. You have very good some fundamentals about KenGen, and just continue doing that. In a matter of while, then the share price will reverse. But congratulations.
Can I take a question that's come off social media, and whoever wants to answer it can. The question is to the panel: how will KenGen get into carbon credit trading? What regulatory structure is needed? I think there was an announcement recently, wasn't there?
Thanks, Ray, and I want to appreciate the person that asked that question. The carbon arena is a huge thing for the world. It's called climate change. Okay? We're trying to keep our entire globe not warmer than 2 degrees. And you've seen this out of all the discussions that have happened in the last 21 years. Many of us may probably do not know that the Conference of Parties meeting that was happening in Paris in November, December, that started 21 years ago, trying to get some kind of a commitment from world powers, from the people who emit lots of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases, trying to get them to commit to some kind of reduction strategy that will save our nation. We've seen the effect and negative impacts of climate change. And we do know that if they're left unattended, we're going to have a problem. We're having flash floods. We are having heat waves. We are having less rainfall. We are having warmer seas. This December was the warmest month ever on the entire globe. And these concerns are real. So what's happening now? We met up 195 countries, and I was blessed to be part of that, the Kenyan delegation, in Paris to discuss what are we going to do. And we ended up for the first time with an agreement that we can implement to reduce the amount of carbon that's going up in the atmosphere. Okay. We had the Kyoto Protocol that came up in 1997, but that did not have a clear reduction strategy. Now we do have a clear reduction strategy. For example, Kenya has committed to reduce its carbon footprint by 30%, okay, from where we were last year. What does that mean? It means that more sponsorship is going to come for green projects, and that is where KenGen has taken the lead. And just to say that it becomes a very clear proposition for the people that we work with. The financiers that come to us, they want to hear a sustainability story around green energy because it's that much important in the world. Okay. Now going on, KenGen started this carbon story about 2006. We started off by signing an agreement with the World Bank Community Carbon Fund to put in some green projects and get them registered as carbon projects with the United Nations Executive Board under the UNFCCC Climate Change Initiative. And what then happened is we managed to get 5 projects registered so far. 3 of them have been operational. We have so far, you may have seen these in our annual accounts, we have so far brought into KenGen 200 million Kenya shillings. It's not a small thing, it's a good thing to do. But that's been out of selling carbon assets. What then are we going to do? Because that platform is going to come to a close come 2020. We're working with the Nairobi Securities Exchange right now. We've got an active committee to have a local platform for trading carbon. It will be the first one in Africa. But that's not a problem. KenGen is used to taking the lead, okay? So, so we're going to continue sharing our carbon assets with the rest of the business community in Kenya. And what will be the benefits? You will be able, when that's listed, to buy some carbon assets that could zero footprint your products that you're selling into sensitive markets like the EU, or even the American market, which is now very sensitive about the carbon footprint of products. You will be able to buy carbon assets from KenGen, offset your own carbon footprint for products, and we'll probably be in a position through NEMA to give you a stamp that will be green projects, zero carbon footprint. And you can sell those at a premium in the European market. I wouldn't say more for now, because the KenGen share might begin to go up right now.
before I throw it to the audience, I got a quick question from Bonnie Tunya, who's somewhere in the audience. Bonnie's asking about overcapacity. He's saying, let me just get to it, 500 megawatts sounds good, but have we fully considered and made provisions for risks due to overcapacity? Albert, are you putting too much megawatts on the grid? Too many.
Okay, let me say this. I've worked in the energy sector for most of my life, for the last over 30 years. And I can tell you, and I see some people here who have been in the energy sector for long, and they will tell you that for a very long time, we have never had enough capacity. We've had situations where we've had power shortfalls. Of course, the worst was in 2001, when we were going for 3 days without power because we didn't have capacity and we got into drought. And because of that, we believe that there are very many people that have shied off from investing in Kenya because of the lack of capacity. In addition, you find that the people who have committed what you call captive generation, so that if you're building your industry, you're also bringing in a power plant because you're not sure when you'll be having power, when you don't have it. So what that means is, first of all, there is some demand that is hidden, because what we have recorded as demand, as 1,530 as of now, is not the true demand. But that if the power was reliable, you would actually be able to record a much higher demand than the 1,530. So it is for the first time now in Kenya that we are having a capacity that you can co-access, so that even if you have some machines out on maintenance or breakdown, you can still meet the demand for power. So what are we saying? We are saying that in the short term, it may appear as if we are putting over capacity. But we want the availability of capacity to stimulate the demand. Because in the past, what we've done is the demand has come before the capacity, and we've tried to catch up, and it's really given Kenya a lot of problem. We talked about what the government and KETRACO are doing to ensure that the power that is generated reaches the customers, so that we don't have situations like what we had last night. I left the office in darkness. I got home in darkness, and I stayed in darkness up to about 11 o'clock. And I'm telling people that I'm generating more power than people are able to take. So we want to eliminate that, through the transmission capacities. And in all fairness, if you look around the country, the parts of the country where you come from, the parts of the city where you drive, you will see that Kenya Power has done a lot of late, putting substations in many different places. And what that is meant to do is to stabilize the system so that it's able to utilize this generation capacity without trouble. So yes, for now we have a small over capacity, but in any case, if you go around the world, even these other countries that are so developed, including South Korea, you'll find that if you study their story, they put huge generation reserves in anticipation of the development of the economy that would come. There is none of the developing world where you'd find that the reserve capacity is only about 10 to 15%. Most of them had more than 30 and somewhere between 30 and 50%. And initially, yes, you have to pay for that capacity, but the good effect that it will bring by giving confidence that if an investor comes, they are assured of power is more than compensates, much more than not having it, and people shy away. I've had a lot of meetings with my CS, PS, and the CS, Aden Mohammed, and the discussions has been around the industrial park. We have made visits to Okaria. We have actually even had investors who have come to Okaria to see where can we put big plants. And some of them have talked of huge power when they set up their industries. So if you put up, let's say, one of these buildings you see in town, let's say 30 stories, the maximum power that you may need in that building is just about one. You'll be lucky to be needing more than 1 megawatt, 1.5 megawatt. But when it comes to industry, yes, it doesn't use a lot of power. So, but for an industry, a manufacturing industry, you could get an industry that actually needs 20 megawatts, 50 megawatts, and some bigger industry may even require as much as 100 megawatts. And that's what we need in Kenya today. And so when we're talking about the industrial park in Naivasha, and in Okaria in particular, and you've heard the statement that the president made, that he wants the standard gauge railway to go all the way to Okaria so that in anticipation of the industries that will come, or at least to be able to pull the industries. On our side as KenGen, we are positioning ourselves to be able to supply power to those large industries that will come. In addition to that, we have had a lot of interest from people who have said, because we are saying we can give you steam that we are mining from the ground. That steam, Simon has done some work in calculating the tariffs. It is showing that if you utilize that steam, particularly if you're coming from an industry that requires steam for your processes, you're able to get that steam at a cost which is about 20% what you would get steam from the boilers using the heavy fuel oil. So, and we are selling that. So what we've done as KenGen is, Moses is just completing a study where we got a consultant from South Korea who has got a lot of experience in the setting up of industrial parks in Korea and other parts of the world. We are looking at that so that we can come up with a blueprint so that we don't have industries coming up just anyhowly, but we'll have a master plan looking at what kind of industries get to this point where we can then construct the steam lines to supply the steam to those industries. And at the same time, the regulatory environment in the sector allows or will be allowing generators such as ourselves, if we get large customers, to be able to sell power directly to them. So that will do two things. Number one, power will be just next to the power plant, so it is not going through the old transmission lines and the wave issues, and KenGen is looking forward to being able to supply the power directly to those customers. So we do see that actually this power that we're talking about has got customers who will take it up within a very short time.
Joshua, you're sitting at the top of the biggest bank in this region. I mean, what do you think of this? Do you think that this is right, that there is a lot of latent demand, that this really is going to make the dramatic change, acceleration, that we can pick up on it?
Thank you very much, and great to be hosted by Albert. This is a very global conversation, actually. Could have been happening anywhere in New York or in Tokyo, in London. And I like the question you raised on sustainability. 4 months ago, we talked about Sustainable Development Goals at the UN General Assembly. And I think KenGen is actually leading. I'm also here as a director of Vision 2030 Delivery Board, so that's why I'm excited to come and join the team. And I think it's good to challenge and maybe share your experience to private sector. You're one of the role model organizations thinking long-term. Climate change issues, green energy, and what more can be done? Because a lot of organizations are not driving. I mean, this cannot be left only to government to drive. And I think about the plans, your energy, whether it's geothermal or hydro, what you're doing on wind. I think we need to see much more the valuation of the organization on the future. And maybe you need to answer in terms of how more we can do as our own organizations. But to answer your questions, Albert, and directly to Alikan, I think the question that we have shot, this overcapacity is actually not understood. I always say that if you want to have a dream, have a very big dream. It takes the same amount of time to dream. So if you're asking KenGen to do a shorter dream, I think then you haven't seen where the country is going. You haven't seen where the opportunity within the region is going. And everyone is looking for this part of the world as the real nerve center. I call it the epicenter for real transformation. And therefore, you're going to go ahead. The mistake will be happening in the next 20 years that we don't have enough capacity. So I think, Alikan, there's the demand for it. I think this is what we've been waiting for, and mine is to thank the team for a great job. Thank you.
Can I take any audience questions? Bharat?
Thank you. I think you've been talking about the fact that there's a lot of demand that you anticipate in the future, right, Albert? I think one of your first slides was we were at 2,000 and the more developed countries were at much higher. South Africa is 44,000. And I think you've been kind of alluding that it would be great if we can produce the energy, but you need some big manufacturing units to take up that energy. So what are you doing as an organization, to work closely with the Ministry of Trade, Commerce, Industry, whatever, to try and actually promote Kenya as a destination where large-scale manufacturing industries should be set up? South Africa is suffering right now. They're not producing enough power. I think a lot of other countries are not producing enough power. So I guess there are manufacturers looking for places to put up their bases, right? Kenya has got efficient labor. We have other infrastructure issues, but with the new railway, with the road infrastructure coming up, and you're anticipating to produce sort of power. I'm not sure that the rest of the world actually knows that. So how do we go about making that big noise and saying, guys, we've got the power, come, put up your factories here?
Because, sorry, just to add to that, I mean, it seems to me that Ethiopia have got a lead in this sort of big-scale manufacturing. How are we going to compete with those folks?
Yeah, okay. Actually, that's a very good question, and it's true that what we need now is to promote Kenya as a destination that has got the right climate for investors to come. Recently, I was in South Africa in an investment forum that was organized by Kenya. So the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Mrs. Amina, was there with us for a whole day. She was there, and we were talking to investors. And when we do that, this is actually the story that we are giving. Of course, the story that we're giving is not just a story about power, because you find that a lot of questions come up about security, about the taxes. And the good thing with a forum like that is you've got all the government organs represented, including the people from the Ministry of Finance, to tell them what incentives, even the tax incentives that the government is giving. And so I just want to agree with you that we need to sell this story. And so we were in South Africa recently, and sometime, I believe it was August, September, we were in Italy in an investment forum that the government had set up. And I understand there are quite a number of these forums that are coming up. And we actually part of that, so that we're able to tell this story and give people an assurance, because, and you're quite right, a lot of people don't understand, what happens here. Because particularly when you're out there, the stories that make the headlines are the hotbed of, this and that, terror and all that. But we want to tell them that there's a lot more better things that are happening, because the foreigners who sit here actually fight that there are better things than just being scared of terror and all that. So we are telling the story, and we want to do more. We don't think we've done enough.
Thank you. My name is Joseph Kering. Albert, thank you so much for your presentation. It's very encouraging, especially when you then compare the demand with the production and the fact that the production should always exceed the demand. From your presentation and the way we know it, energy is a key lever to us attaining our Vision 2030 in making Kenya a globally competitive country. Can you help us put a number to that, in the sense that if energy is what will make Kenya globally competitive, and we are competing with the likes of South Africa and Egypt and other countries that have cheaper energy in Africa, what does it mean for us to produce energy cheaply? You talk of US cents per kilowatt hour. So at what rate or at what cost is Egypt and South Africa producing a kilowatt hour, so that we can know how competitive we are? Secondly, You've explained the production of electricity using geothermal. It sounded very simple. I would imagine a lot of engineering goes into it. The fact that you channel steam, you generate power, and you take water back down to be heated by the heat underground. How does it compare per unit cost with hydro-generated electricity? To the extent, therefore, that if Ethiopia is going to increase their generation from 2,000 megawatts to 10,000 megawatts, I think, from your presentation in the next 2 years, and from what our moderator has said, that maybe then Ethiopia might attract more investors in their country, large manufacturers, then how can we make sure that the power we generate from geothermal is as competitive as that which is generated from hydro? And finally, Albert, we are talking about integrating the region the way the rest of the world is integrating. We could be investing a lot of money, capital in energy generation in Kenya, yet as we integrate, then it might make more sense to partner with other countries. For example, how much does it cost the Congo to produce hydroelectricity power, and Ethiopia, to the extent that therefore, if they are going to be then the suppliers of electricity in the region, would it then render uncompetitive the investment we've made in this country? And if it's about then collaboration, how can we collaborate with those countries to produce energy cheaply? Thank you so much. That's the quickest I can summarize my questions.
Kenyans have a world record of one question becomes 4. Thank you. That was very interesting, by the way. Sorry.
All right. I think I'll make sure that mine is one question.
Thank you.
I'm Joyce Ann Wainaina. I'm with Citibank, one of the many banks in the room that is very proud to be supporting KenGen. My question, and I'll make sure it is one because I think you've covered quite a few of them, is really around the oil prices.
Ooh.
Okay, I know we have touched on oil already and we've touched on sustainability, and that is absolutely the right way to go. But at what level do you think the oil prices need to go down to, knowing that they are heading quickly down to about $20 per barrel, that it becomes justifiable to refire those HFO thermal power generators to make more power for Kenya cheaply and, good for us?
Good question. It's up 11% in the last 2 days. It might be a dead cat bounce.
Hi, Ali Khan. I would like to follow his example, but there's a reason why. I actually want to, because one of the reasons a lot of us are here is because there's an impending rights issue. So I'd like to move a little towards the numbers rather than the grand story. Joshua, likes the grand story, but Joshua lends money. So, there's so his intentions may not be all altruistic. But anyway. So first is what I'd like to ask is, as far as KenGen is concerned, before you start a project, are the PPAs in place? Or do you do projects on spec, hoping that people will sign up later? And of course, unfortunately, or fortunately, unfortunately, it's sort of a monopsony in our case. So, KPLC, do they play? Do they say, we'll sign the PPA, we'll take it, capacity charges, everything that comes into play. The other thing is demand growth, and I think somebody else had asked a question. I think it was Boni Tunya had asked a question, is will a demand growth? Yes, it's good to have reserves, but there's a cost to everything, especially capacity charges. So is demand growth, what do you look at? What have you estimated demand growth at? The other thing is, Mary mentioned something very interesting. She's like, look, people are lining up, or rather, Ali Khan said people are lining up to give you money. The government is 70%, everyone wants to give you money. Why do you need a rights issue from the 190? And because obviously we're talking quite a big sum of cash over here. One of the unfortunate things when we read papers is, every time I read about GDC, KenGen, it's not been as much, but GDC, there have been some things in KenGen, Ketraco, it's about corruption. So one of the concerns that we have as shareholders, stakeholders, and as citizens is, where are we with this? Because it's a pity, but even I think in today's paper there's something called Rentco and someone suing someone and going to the PPOA and all that stuff. Please give us an idea of what's going on. How do we know that we are getting best value as citizens, as shareholders getting best value for our money? One final thing, and this is more of a personal stuff here, but I can see Bharat there, Joshua there, maybe the other CEOs here. I like people who eat their own cooking. And Mugo has got 184,000 shares. The entire board has got 376,000 shares. Why are you guys not eating more of the cooking here? Let's be clear. Today, I have been a big proponent for many, many years of ownership. I'm a fan of Warren Buffett, and ownership by senior management and directors gives credence to what you are asking us to do. When you come and ask me for money and say, Rakesh, invest in KenGen. And then you say, but then you go put your money in a shamba, in a building, hatutakiyo. This doesn't work. And finally, there is one thing I want KenGen to be aware of. Look, I've known John Modani for many years since his Kenya Airways days, and I've met, of course, Bwana Simon, we have met at the EGMs. Your rights issue, there are two rights issues in Kenya. There were 3-2-1s. One was Olympia, and one was Kenya Airways. Thank you.
Can I just, can we just check how many shares you said Albert had?
184,000 and some change.
So why didn't you respond?
Okay, thank you. And I love that. And thank you very much for those questions. And so let me start with that one of the shares. And you're right, you're probably reading a annual report, right? So that was those were the shares I had as of June last year. But to tell you now, I'll tell you because I do not lie, and there are many people here who know that. Since then, I've actually bought some more shares in KenGen, and it currently stands at slightly over 600,000. I mean, first of all, to prove a point that, in fact, it's just that I don't have as much money. I would right now, I would buy so many shares in KenGen, because I believe in KenGen. And I think there is such a future in KenGen. Perhaps I should go to Joshua and he gives me some money so that I can buy a few more shares. But it's true, between June and December, and I have a statement, if I showed you, you can actually see I've been buying, because it's not like it's inside trading, because we published our accounts way back in August. People can see what is there. And I don't, and I think that we should be buying. And in fact, the other day we were talking with the chairman. Somebody was telling the chairman, even the chairman, get shares. And he says, yes, I'm going to do it. So we believe in the company. And don't be surprised next year when we publish an annual report and you'll be seeing that the board of directors have a lot of shares in the company. We believe in it. So let me answer one or two questions, and then Simon will help me with the questions on the tariff comparators in the region here. But let me start with this, and also another question you raised about corruption, and you're quite right. The kind of stories we read in Kenya today, they're about corruption. But I think many people who are seated here will attest to the fact that, at least in KenGen, we have escaped that kind of thing. We don't have scandals. Yes, you may have read one story or maybe two, and they're very simple. We are, because of being 70% owned by government, we are therefore a state corporation, so we have to follow the Public Procurement and Disposal Act, which requires that when you go to tender and you do an award, the person who did not get an award has the right to go for an appeal at the Public Procurement Appeals Board, and that's their right, and they'll go and do that. And if they're not satisfied there, they will even have the right to go to court, to ask for a judicial review. And that is what happened in one of the cases recently that you may have read in the papers. And the ruling that happened some 2 days ago, when was that? 19th, throughout the appeal. So it actually ruled that the PPOA was right and KenGen was right and all that. So we do not have and we do not tolerate corruption within KenGen. And it's well known, and we have a good policy about corruption, and we have big projects. To be honest, I don't think there's any parastatal in this country that has got the kind of Kenya shillings or dollar, whatever, size of projects like what happens in KenGen. The project we did in Okaria, the 280 megawatts project, the total number of contracts we had as a single project added to about 800 million US dollars. And even in that project, in 2011, after we did the tenders, one of the bidders was not satisfied and they went to the review board. And the board listened to the story and they said the process had been carried out well. KenGen, we don't have any problem, you're okay. So I'd just like to assure you and all the people here that we are very strict when it comes to the way we conduct our tenders. And I always tell, bidders, if you think you have a genuine reason why you've not been given a tender, just come to us and we investigate. And if we find there's any wrongdoing, we take action. So please be assured of that. Joyce, you asked a question about the oil prices.
Go down to zero, or you're going to have to go back to oil.
Okay, one is we know that it will not go down to zero. And even where we are, I don't know, the price, where are we now?
It's now at $31 a barrel.
It's about that $1. Yes. But remember, as he explained, and ERSC has been trying to explain this because people have not been seeing the reduction that is required. The fixed costs that are in oil mean that even if it comes down to 20, the prices will still be like diesel probably above 60. So if you use that price times the specific fuel consumption, which gives us then the kilograms per kilowatt hour times the shillings per liter, you still find that the costs from the thermals will still be a bit high. And to be honest, we are looking at reducing the thermal as much as possible. In fact, when the president was commissioning Okaria, he said he wants to see zero from the thermal, which is not bad. We will keep the thermal there as a standby so that we can run it, when we need it, when the hydros are not there. When we have problems, we are quite happy to run the thermals. We'll not remove them from the grid. We'll keep them there just as a standby, and I think that is good for all of us. The competitive energy and the comparator with South Africa and others, I'll ask Simon to answer that. When it comes to geothermal vis-a-vis the hydro, we are developing geothermal at a tariff of somewhere between 7 to 9 US cents per kilowatt hour. Hydros are site specific, and most of our good hydro sites have been developed, and that is why of late you don't have any hydro that has been developed. We have a project where a visibility study has been done. It's called High Grad Force. That project is a multi-purpose project. It's a very big dam. The cost is estimated at about $2 billion US dollars. The cost of electricity from that investment will be somewhere between 11 to 13 US cents per kilowatt hour, which is clearly way above the geothermal. Of course, there are benefits that will be associated with the irrigation or the water supplies that could come out of there. But the point there is that geothermal, as of now, is actually the least cost mode of generation in this country. What about the integration within the region? Very good question. And actually, that's one of the things we're looking at in the sector, because we are saying, when you look at even the production of power, Joshua talked about the time it takes to dream. A small dream and a big dream. It takes about the same time. And we have a similar argument, actually, when it comes to project. The effort to construct a 100 megawatt project is the same effort in terms of project management as when you are constructing a 1,000 megawatt project. And there is every reason to believe that the bigger the project, the more you could benefit from the economies of scale. And so what are we doing in the region? When you look at the East African community, there is an energy committee that meets, discusses the demand, the projections for various countries, and then makes a report to the ministers when they meet, and they endorse that. And what we're looking at there is, if we could have an interconnection in the region, even somebody developing power, knowing that you're not just developing for Kenya, and even this debate we are having about whether Kenya has got excess demand capacity or not, when we are interconnected, you're not just looking at Kenya, but you're looking at the region. For a start, Kenya Power Lighting Company has already signed a power purchase agreement to export 30 megawatts of energy to Rwanda. There is a project that is happening to do a transmission line between Kenya and Tanzania, because currently we are not interconnected to Tanzania, except at a very small level. So like Namanga, because Kenya has taken power there, the Namanga of Tanzania gets a little power from Kenya. Lunga Lunga, we get power from Tanzania to power the little town that is there. But when it comes to power that can make an impact, for example, Tanzania does not have enough power today, and yet we have excess power. So if we had a transmission line connecting Tanzania, Tanzania would be buying power from us today. So we are looking at the region, and of course you've heard about the interconnector with Ethiopia, which is already ongoing. The point there being, Ethiopia will have a lot of hydro when there is rain, but you also know that Ethiopia suffers from some very bad droughts, and in such times, Kenya would be able to help them and assist them with power. We can export both sides. So that's the way we are looking at it in terms of what is happening in the region. And I think when we look at it that way, there is every reason to want to have the regional integration. So what I will ask Simon to do is to just talk a bit to the tariff comparison, if you have a tariff comparison with South Africa or any other country for that matter in the region. And okay, there was a question about the PPAs. And yes, I can confirm to you, in the old days, we'd be pushed by government to do a project and we do it quickly, and we don't have a PPA. And when we start negotiating the PPA, we are really disadvantaged. But we learned our lessons. So today, before we construct the power plant, we have a PPA, and you are sitting next to one of our financiers, to your right. And he will tell you that they've also made it a condition precedent that before they disburse their money, they want to see a PPA that KenGen has, which is very helpful for us, because then we are not carrying the risk of doing a power plant and then we do not have an assurance that that will be paid. So I think I would like to assure the investors that we are investing, wisely, so that we're not carrying the risks of not being paid after we construct the power plant.
Thank you very much for those questions. Actually, very interesting, and thank you, Albert, for the answers you've given so far. One of the issues that is important to understand is that the entire world is going through a change in dynamics in terms of investment and movement of products. Okay. Some of the people who are interested right now in lots in the Olkaria Industrial Park are people who previously manufactured products in China and sent them here. Why would they want to relocate? It is because, number one, they've got a market to start with. Okay? While we ourselves are looking at the price of power, land, utilities, and so on that go into manufacturing, the people who put up factories, they're looking at the market. And they're looking at at what cost can they sell those products. What will be the size of that market as it grows? And as Bharat said, Kenya has got interesting opportunities here. Number one, its middle class is growing very quickly. Lots of young people with a good education coming into the market and actually very well enlightened about what to look out for. So these are some of the issues that are driving people wanting to come here. Number two, the competitiveness is changing. We did talk about the way that we have a thermal fleet right now. We have 7 power stations, sizable power stations that are capable of generating power using heavy fuel oil. Right now, they're generating only about 10% of the energy, but we're paying all the capacity charges. We're paying those capacity charges using some of the earnings that we got from geothermal. What will happen when Olkaria 5, Olkaria 1, Unit 6, or Olkaria 6 come on? The cost additional per unit is not going to be the same as it is now, because we will not have more capacity charges for thermal plants to underwrite. And that is why this market is increasingly more competitive as we go geothermal. Okay? Next to consider is what's happening in the competition countries, South Africa, Egypt. As you have heard of late, Egypt has been taking away the subsidies on gas. And just 2 weeks ago, they announced another reduction in the subsidies. And what happens is that the cost of power immediately goes up because they're generating most of their power from gas. So when the subsidy on the fuel is taken off, the cost of electricity just takes a jump. Right now, they're sitting at 7. It is estimated that by the end of this year, they will be at 9, and that will keep going up. So there will be a change in those dynamics as well. Now, the point is does it then make sense to produce products in Egypt and send them to Kenya? Will they be cheaper? It's no longer the case. It's not going to be cheaper. And so it makes better sense to come to Kenya. The final item on that is that remember that Kenya has prepared an investment package that people who come here and do manufacturing, especially for export, enjoy 10 years tax holiday. This is attracting a lot of people. For example, one of the investors who's interested in textiles is coming in because of their Goa Opportunity Package, okay, which has been renewed for another 10 years. And they're looking at, if we come and set up this factory, what will have happened in the 10 years? And then what will be the opportunity of maintaining their competitiveness and their market share in the world even after those 10 years? So very interesting dynamics happening here. Look at South Africa. South Africa in 2013 raised their tariffs by 35%. In 2014, they added another 20%, and they were targeting 25%. In the last year, they've gone up another 30%. When they bring in the 10,000 megawatts that's being built now, the tariffs will go up by 40%. Of course, every new power station is a little more expensive than the older one. All the hydros that were built in the 60s and the 70s coming up to the early 80s, they generate power at an average of between 3 and 4 US cents because they are older. But the new builds, unless you're doing geothermal now and using steam out of the ground, they're not coming in that cheap. An example is Ethiopia. Ethiopia was generating between 3 and 4 US cents up to 4 years ago. 3 and 4. Now all their new builds are between 6 and 6.5 US cents per kilowatt hour. I actually believe that the PPA between Kenya and Ethiopia was quite commercial when it was signed. Right now, if you talk to them, they would be wanting that tariff to go up. Okay. So basically, it's the dynamics are changing. Dynamics are changing. And Kenya is getting increasingly more a better destination for investments. Okay. And that is where we're going. Now, what's in it for KenGen? For KenGen, as we develop geothermal being on the front line, we are able to take advantage of supplying that high density industry, which is mostly 24 hours with low cost power. We're targeting that when these industries come to Olkaria, we will give them a package that will learn in parallel with what the Ministry of Industrialization and Entrepreneurship Development is offering. We're looking at a 10-year horizon. So we want that business environment to become predictable so that they then can know what are they coming here to do and what will be the platform. So we're looking at which side of our bread is buttered, but at the same time, we're looking at what we're offering Kenyans, not only in terms of electricity, but also in terms of products, which will come out of that area. And we now begin to discuss what then do we need as infrastructure development that will partner with the power and the steam, as Albert has said, to make that entire enterprise workable. How much land do we need for the terminal, for the Stoddard Gauge Rail? Shall we need KRA on the ground? If we're expecting products, do we need Kenya Port Authority? And we're working with Moses here to make sure that the land is available. When you begin to talk about reducing the cost of steam to 1/5, that makes a lot of sense. It begins to get interesting for companies like the paper industry. Those are very high energy intensity industry, and for example, companies that do chemicals. So we're going to begin to see importing a tube of Nivea getting cheaper to make in Kenya than bringing it from overseas. And when the people who actually sell those products begin to see that, guess what? They're very wise. They will want to be on the ground before their competitors get on the ground. All right?
Okay. So you had asked, you asked me, why do you want to raise money from the shareholders as opposed to getting it from somewhere else? And that's, it's actually for a very simple reason. You know, this company is yours and mine, you know, us who have invested in it. And you know, as you grow, and as we showed you, is a growth story, you can borrow only so much money in terms of debt. And as you borrow, then you need some equity so that you balance that equation. Many financiers, when they come to us, they're looking at the gearing. So yes, they're ready to lend money to us, but only to the extent that we're remaining within the capital structure that we've agreed with them, which is finance up to 70% with debt, but then 30% must come from equity. So if we keep borrowing, and we are getting close to 70%, then it's either we say, fine, that's the end of the company, we can't invest anymore, or what we are now suggesting we do. We go to the shareholders and tell them, put in a little more money so that we have some equity that gives us some headroom and we can borrow a little more to grow. And because we've seen that it's that growth that will then make the company better, and a little later, you will be able to start now milking for what you've put in. So please support us with that. Then somebody asked about the demand, and in my presentation, I'd actually shared a graph where we are showing that in our projection here, that for example, by 2020, we are expecting that the demand will be at about 4,200. That's a figure I mentioned. I qualify that figure and say that's a figure we have tried to work out, looking at a more realistic growth scenario, because the figure that government had worked out under the 5,000 plus megawatts was a much higher figure. But looking at what has happened in the last 3 years, we've just scaled that down, you know, sort of, and saying that by 2020, that's where we'd like to be looking at. And probably by 2025, we'd be looking at a demand of about, 8,000 megawatts. And that is still being worked out. And one of the things that the industry was doing in terms of trying to establish even a better figure for this demand was, you may have seen some adverts that were through the Ministry of Energy and Kenya Power and ourselves, actually all the players, which we were calling Plan for Power. And what we're doing in that is to ask people who have got plans to expand their factories, or in fact to bring in new factories, set up new establishments, to tell us what their plans are. Say, I'll be setting up my factory somewhere in Mariakani, I will need 5 megawatts, and I'll need it in the next 3 years or 5 years. So that in that way, we're able to firm up these figures. That exercise is going on, and we'll be trying to finalize that very soon so that we can have probably a better feel of this demand focus.
It's been a fascinating discussion. I'd like to take a question from Walter who's texted me from the back of the room. I've also got a question on social media asking about how can the youth plug into the KenGen story. And I just wanted, before I take Walter's question, just go to what you were saying, Simon. Very interesting what you said. The World Bank had a chap called Justin Lin, and he came here about 8-9 years ago. And I remember him telling me, Ali Khan, China's low-cost manufacturing has got to move to Africa. It's now because the per capita income in China, I think, is about $5,000. It doesn't make sense. You know, we've seen in the turbulence in the markets is about this rebasing of the Chinese economy. Do we have the ingredients with your cheap power, with this whole industrial parks thing you've outlined, seeming increased volatility in South Africa, higher tariff charges? Are we in a counterintuitive place, in a very good place, in a counterintuitive way that we're not realizing that we are positioned now to really take advantage of that transfer? Would you say we are in the right place, and you know, maybe we're not really truly understanding how good a place we're in? Out of interest, would you say that?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Walter, interestingly, does China Africa? Walter, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, thank you very much, Ali. My name is Walter Rigu. I work for a company called Kamal. We are a Kenyan company, and we are based in Beijing and as well as here in Nairobi. My question is very simple. The Ministry of Industrialization a couple of years ago signed an MOU with a Chinese company called Sino Steel. And the idea was that Sino Steel will help Kenya set up a steel mill. However, with our discussions with Sino Steel, they tell us that the biggest concern is that there is not enough power. So my first question is, what is the situation with the MOU with Sino Steel? The second question is, if you look at Hebei province, which is the province right next to Beijing, there's over 150 steel mills. With the new Chinese government regulation, a lot of these steel mills will be shut down. And in China, they're considered small and medium-sized. But if those steel mills were to locate in Kenya, they probably would be the largest producers of steel. However, talking with these Chinese companies, the concern is always the same. The power in Kenya is too expensive. It's much more expensive than Ethiopia. It's much more expensive than our other neighbors. So the companies, they want to relocate here, but the biggest factor that seems to be stopping them is the power. So I'd like to understand from your side, what are the incentives from the power perspective to attract these companies? Because they are there and they're being shut down. And I've seen some of that equipment is pretty brand new. But those companies need to be incentivized to move the overcapacity to Kenya, but the power seems to be the sticking point. Thank you.
Okay. And I like the first question you asked, where the China company says, we want to move to Kenya, but there's not enough power. And I think that's really answering the question we've been discussing, that your capacity is too much. Because some of those people out there, the fact that when they look at the history, there's not been enough power, makes them very hesitant. But if we can show that we have enough power, I think that's an indication that in the first instance, people can actually come in here. Then we get into the challenge of what about the cost of power? Now, there are two ways of looking at that. Number one, you see, we can only do, first of all, what we can in terms of the resources that we have. If we have geothermal and it gives us 7 to 8 US cents, that's the cost at which we'll produce our power. If we have wind, and somebody asked about solar, and that will develop in the days to come, we can only produce power at that level. And then, in our discussions with government, and I'm glad you talked about the Ministry of Industrialization and Enterprise Development, one of the discussions that was going on, particularly the time we took some Chinese investors to Okaria, was the fact that the government was looking at much more than just the power and looking at the economic knock-on effects that will happen. The employment, the other things that will develop in Naivasha to support the industries that will come in there, because I think the original company was talking of employing how many people? 30,000 people. So when you think about the housing required, the employment, so the government was looking at what that would do to the economy. And so at one point, there were discussions of, because you see, for KenGen, we can't sell power below production. It would not make sense. But governments can underwrite part of that and say, because of what else that we see happening in the economy, KenGen can produce power at, let's say, 5 to 7 US cents per kilowatt hour, but will be ready to give the investors at cost or at below cost and help KenGen meet the difference between what KenGen is producing and what we are paying it. And that discussion has gone on, and I wouldn't be surprised if at one point, depending on many other things, the government is able to do that. But as KenGen, we can't sell power below cost. I don't think any of the investors here would be listening to us if we are saying that we are producing power at this and we are selling at that. But government is in a position to give the right incentives to attract some of these people. Okay? Now, there was a question about...
how can the youth, we got a really youthful audience, how can they plug into the story you're telling?
Okay. First of all, the youth. Let me say that, first of all, KenGen has got a number of things that we're actually doing with the youth. One is, as part of the government strategy of developing the youth, some of our tenders are actually designed specifically for the youth. And initially, we had a few problems here and there because we understand that some of the youth may not have the capacity to do these projects quickly or at the quality that we want. And we have been trying to say, fine, you may not be able to do it, but we know that you're the people who will do very well in future. And so we work with you slowly and allow you. So we have cases where we've given tenders to the youth. They have not delivered at the time it should have been delivered. If we're using a normal contractor, we would say, we are going to penalize you. But we work with them and help them so that, because we know that maybe that's the first project. The second, by the time you're doing the third one, you are actually going on. So that's a way of trying to help them. So we are a little more accommodative to the youth than would accommodate somebody who is mature and prepared. The other thing we're doing, of course, is like some of the people that are leaving school. Recently, the board of directors approved a program where we actually attach graduates to a company so that they can work with us. Some of our experienced engineers, scientists in our career, they can work with them and help them. And in the process of doing that, some of them will learn the job and either get employed in KenGen if there's a vacancy or go to the other places. But much more, we want to train these people so that some of them can establish their own businesses, particularly when they see the opportunities that exist in not just getting a job where you're getting paid by the company every month, but where you can supply or construct or do some work for the company. So we are working really to help the youth and also assist the government in making a strategy in developing the youth.
Well, there is Friday evening that everyone has made a special effort to come, and thank you for such a rich conversation. And what a story that came from Embu without electricity, and now you're sitting at the apex of our electricity generating company. And that ties back to what Joshua was saying, which is we are all dreaming, and it takes a dream to make things happen at times. And really was a really rich conversation. I think my call to action is that I think we got to get out there and buy the share at $5.50, because I don't, it sometimes when something looks like a no-brainer, you go, am I missing something? Am I not understanding something? Is there some secret that I don't think so. When something's on a P of 1, I think you've got to look at it, and you've got to look at it very closely. So I, for one, liked what I heard. And I'd like to also say a couple of things to Rakesh, because Rakesh occasionally worries that our CEOs are not invested enough in their companies, and nor are they concerned enough about the share price. Rakesh, I can tell you I've had several conversations with Albert about the share price, and when it gets to levels which he's not comfortable with, he steps up, and I think we saw that in the number that he put out there. I would like to thank everyone for coming today. I'd like to thank my panel. Great input from everybody there. And I'd like to thank Albert for coming and sharing this great story, and one where really the numbers are the message. If you look at the profits, if you look at what's happened with that geothermal story, I mean, it can only get better, I think. And that's my understanding of it. So if we can have a round of applause for a very, very... Albert and everyone, part of MindSpeak is that you do interact a little bit. We would be grateful if you'd stay around, and if anyone has got any pressing questions, they can probably take this opportunity to buttonhole whoever is the right person for you. I'd like to thank you. And finally, I did not recognize everybody in the audience. We had some great guests today. Friends, Joshua, Bharat, the South Korean ambassador made an effort, the French Development Agency, and just everybody in this room, because without you, we wouldn't have MindSpeak, and we appreciate you. Thank you very much.